from the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
All right, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight. Got a fun show for you this evening. We'll talk about the latest with Juwan James, the latest rumors on Aaron Rodgers, and also debunking some of the myths about next year's quarterback class. But first, Ben, let's start with the really unfortunate news about Juwan James. He looks like he tore his Achilles, and he's going to be out for the season. And I mean, there's a lot of parts to this, really, because he did it off-site, which means now there's all sorts of conversations about his contract and his guarantees. We can get into that a little bit. But more than anything, I think a lot of fans want to know, where's the replacement coming from? What does it look like, especially since the Broncos didn't draft an offensive tackle?
Right. Well, it's going to come from the free agent market. You're going to take a look at some of the guys out there. And on the roster, you have some guys that you'll put in the competition mix, but you are bringing in a veteran free agent as an insurance policy one way or the other, whether that guy's going to start or going to be the backup. So they're going to look at Bobby Massey and Dennis Kelly first out of the gate. If those guys and their workouts and their medicals don't clear, they'll go further down the list. But right now, that's where they're at. They did reach out to Mitchell Schwartz, but he's still rehabbing his back, and he's not sure he's going to play again. So, you know, they needed to make a move now, and that wasn't the direction they were going to go. They've not reached out to Charles Leno, despite some other reporting and some stuff that's out there. So those right now, they're focusing on Dennis Kelly, Bobby Massey. Calvin Anderson would be in the mix, as well as the undrafted rookie out of Illinois State, Drew Himmelman, who's 6'9", 320 pounds.
Yeah, he's a massive human being. Let's go back to Calvin Anderson here for a little bit, because we had kind of come into this season with the anticipation that Calvin Anderson was your swing at this point. So kind of like Elijah Wilkinson was expected to be a bit of a swing for you last year. He's, of course, no longer here. Calvin Anderson, could he be the answer at right tackle?
Potentially. I mean, Calvin played pretty well in that Carolina game. Now, it
left tackle, right?
He played left tackle in replacement of Garrett Bowles. That's not to say that over an extended season he would or wouldn't be able to hold up at that level, but he played pretty well in that game. And I think the Broncos want to give him the opportunity to see what he can do with an increased workload. So I think you'll see a competition between him and someone else for the right tackle, whether it's Kelly or Massey or whomever. At the right tackle position in training camp. But I think he would start at number 2 on the depth chart and have to earn it.
There's a lot of people out there saying that the Broncos maybe should have seen this coming, having hindsight arguments and all those kinds of things. I'd say the one thing that gets missed in wouldn't it have been great if they would have drafted an offensive tackle and they would have gone into the draft knowing that maybe Juwan James wasn't 100% for this next year, because he really hasn't been 100% here for the Broncos even in his short time. I feel like, though, unless you were taking a first-round offensive tackle, it would likely be a developmental guy into day 2 or day 3. Anybody you're drafting would have likely been somebody that you would have been competing, and you'd still be going to look for a vet in order to find your eventual, at least this year, replacement.
I partially agree with that. I think you can find guys that can start in rounds 2 and 3 in some cases, but usually they've got some kind of flag on them, especially at the tackle position. Tevin Jenkins with the medicals, et cetera, et cetera. So I do agree with you in the sense that they're probably developmental, but you can kind of wing and a prayer it. That said, you would bring in a veteran anyway. You're right. You would bring in a veteran anyway as a hedge, an insurance policy, whatever you want. You can't just have your pass protection. You can't just roll the dice on that. You can't just have it be somebody you don't know and aren't comfortable with. So you bring a veteran in, and if you get into training camp and you see the young guys got it, then you can always let the vet go and go from there.
That's not to say I didn't want an offensive tackle in the draft, because I really did.
Well, I really thought you hate offensive tackles.
No. You see, you say stuff like that, and people believe it. Yeah. No, I wanted an offensive tackle. I wanted somebody in the building to groom. I wanted Mike Munchak to have an opportunity to work with a guy for an entire year, and then maybe he would eventually be Juwan James' replacement next year, because we talked about that as a bit of the timeline. So, but it isn't like the Broncos didn't target some guys. The Broncos targeted some offensive tackles in the draft. They just didn't come away with the guys they really wanted.
Yeah, I think if Pat Surtain had gone, Rashawn Slater would have very much been in play there at 9. That said, there were some other guys they looked at. Jalen Mayfield was a guy in the 3rd round that, if he had gotten to them, probably would have been the selection rather than the trade back. So they were eyeballing tackles. They did have their eye on some things. Board just didn't fall right.
All right, I need you to explain to people why moving Dalton Risner to right tackle is not such a good idea.
Well, it's not going to happen, first of all, and there's several reasons it's a bad idea. One, Dalton Risner doesn't have the athletic profile of a tackle in the NFL. Yeah, he played right tackle at Kansas State some. He also played center. Why don't you move him to center? That said, I don't understand why you would want to move a solid piece on the offensive line, something you already believe in, and create another hole just to give it a go at right tackle either. Like, the philosophy behind that doesn't make sense.
Well, people are just trying to fit all the pieces together here. You drafted Quinn Miners, you have Natani Moody,
and that's what it is.
Yeah.
These people are trying to put a best five together, kind of like Madden, instead of what's actually going on here. And that is you've got you're going to have a competition at center between Lloyd Cushenberry and Quinn Miners. You're going to have a competition at right guard between Natani Moody and Graham Glasgow. And you go from there, and then they've got to figure out the right tackle situation. The left side of the line, they're pretty comfortable with. Dalton Reisner's got to improve his play from last year. It wasn't as good as people made it out to be, but
he was also compensating for Lloyd Cushenberry at times.
Yeah, he's compensated for Cush, and that's the thing. So there are going to be some competition along that line, and they'll figure that out. But you're not going to take Reisner from his best position, which is guard, and move him out to right tackle, where he's probably a liability, and create additional hole at guard. Last
thing here for you. As far as the guarantees on Juwan James' contract, that's been a big source of topic, even around the NFL, NFLPA. Mm-hmm. This was something we talked about coming into this thing. NFLPA was recommending the players not show up for these offseason training. He worked out off campus, offside the facility, and now there's a little bit of risk. What do you think is ultimately going to happen here?
I think that they'll find a way to get him some money in a settlement, but I think overall he's out most of the money, and the NFL is taking a hardline stance on this. So I think that players are going to have to recognize that there's a significant liability with not working out at team facilities.
All right, there you go. When we come back, the latest on Aaron Rodgers, the rumors, reports, we'll get to it next. Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. I want to get into the latest rumors and reports surrounding Green Bay Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers. Shortly before the draft started, a bombshell report came out that Aaron Rodgers was more or less not going to be showing up for the Packers, did not want to play again for the Green Bay Packers. And, of course, that led to a flurry of conversations and reports out there that what teams were going to be interested in, what teams would make a play for him. And the Broncos are rumored to be in the mix here. So right now he is a Green Bay Packer. Nothing has changed on that. They're saying they're not trading him. But push comes to shove, he could potentially decide to retire and could force his way out. So under that perspective, where do we sit right now as far as you see where Aaron Rodgers is with the Green Bay Packers?
They're at an impasse, and there is a path where Aaron Rodgers stays in Green Bay. There is a path for that. But overall, they're at an impasse right now, and Rodgers is taking a hardline stance on some things. And right now his position is that he's not coming back to the Green Bay Packers, and he's told people that, and he's told potential free agents that, and teammates that, and he is putting together, or has put together, a list of teams that he would potentially be okay going with. Now, he doesn't have a no trade clause, but so his leverage is basically I'll retire rather than leveraging the no trade clause. But he's putting together a list of teams that he would be okay with, and Denver is right there at the top of that list. I can tell you from his camp. Now, I don't want to get too far into that because there's tampering and all that.
Yeah.
There have not been improper calls or any of that kind of stuff.
Which is tough to prove anyways most of the time. And the Packers even tried to do that way back in the day.
I saw some report out there, and it was total nonsense. In fact, the Broncos hadn't even contacted the Packers till this past weekend. They hadn't talked to Aaron Rodgers at all, and they hadn't so that kind of stuff's just weird to me. But Denver is a priority on Aaron Rodgers' list, right there at the top. And so, I think that Broncos are kind of eyeballing this situation, like, okay, let's see if Green Bay's willing to move on from him or not, if they just call his bluff and let him retire and go host Jeopardy or whatever it is that he's going to do next. So as it sits right now, I don't believe Aaron Rodgers will be back in Green Bay. I don't, personally. There is a path for that, and it involves fixing his contract, probably moving on from Jordan Love and not making Aaron Rodgers a lame duck, kind of guy, and probably moving on from the general manager. Whether the Packers want to do that or not, remains to be seen.
Yeah, it sets a pretty significant precedent if you're going to move on from a GM because a player says so.
Right.
Now, we have seen precedent where a backup quarterback has been moved on from, and Jimmy Garoppolo out in the New England Patriots. That was an example where, depending on what reports you read or hear, Tom Brady, Jimmy Garoppolo, they ended up moving on from Jimmy Garoppolo during his rookie contract right before it was getting ready to end, as maybe there was a little bit of pressure. It was probably ultimately the right move. I mean, New England remained a very good team. I think they won a championship in there. I don't know. There's so many to count. You lose track. Mm-hmm. But then Jimmy Garoppolo goes over to San Francisco, and they ended up getting a second-round pick. So there's precedent there on moving on from the backup quarterback, the eventual successor, just not so much on the quarterback or player forcing the GM to be fired.
Yeah, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to give players that kind of power. You don't want to set a precedent where you're allowing players to dictate who the management is, who's doing those kinds of things. There's a reason you have a division of labor, and I think that's a good thing. I think having general managers, that's where the buck stops, is a good thing because it creates an order structure. It creates a reporting structure that I think is a lot more favorable in the end to success. So I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that firing your general manager because your quarterback can't find a way to get along with him is a good idea. I think Aaron Rodgers has some valid points about that general manager. But again, if you come to an impasse like that, it's up to that general manager to find a way to fix it or move on from the quarterback.
And you also wonder a little bit just the function of how the Packers work. They don't really, their owner are the fans, right? I mean, it's a little bit of a different, they have a CEO, but I mean, I'm saying like it's a little bit different structure. You sort of wonder if they were a more traditional structure, how this would actually play out. But the Broncos are in the mix here, as you mentioned, if nothing else, because they have the availability to it. They are in need. And if you're looking at a game of musical chairs, they're a team that is still in the quarterback market. They've dipped their toe throughout the course of the entire offseason, and the offseason isn't over yet. So they could be in the mix here, at least according to Rodgers camp, Aaron Rodgers camp. What's the timeline on this? Because I keep hearing that it has to be post-June 1 if this is even going to be a consideration.
Well, you can agree to a deal before then, but it couldn't be executed until after June 1st. And the reason for that is the salary cap relief for the Packers, in order to even make this possible, doesn't exist until after June 1st, just by the way the cap is accounted for and the designations are accounted for in terms of the cap. So the Packers aren't absorbing a $34 million cap when they couldn't absorb that right now anyway. They'd have to cut other players, and that's just not something they're going to do. So if a deal were to be consummated, it would either be agreed to ahead of and then not executed until, or agreed to after June 1st.
What kind of compensation would be involved in this kind of trade?
Well, at least 2 firsts, probably a mid, maybe a little higher than that in terms of draft picks. And then you got some players. I mean, you're probably sending a bridge quarterback to them. You'd probably send Bridgewater rather than Locke because they'd want the sure veteran with the high floor rather than another developmental guy. They got a developmental guy already. So you're probably looking at Bridgewater instead of Locke going that direction. You're probably looking at a receiver or something, maybe a Deshaun Hamilton, since he doesn't necessarily fit here. And then you want a good player, an ascending player on a rookie deal that's still cheap because they'd need that due to the dead cap that they get. So you're probably looking at somebody like a Bradley Chubb or Draymond Jones, something like that. So the one thing I don't think would be happening is the suggestion that you're going to send Pat Surtain. That doesn't make any sense at all. That's a $28 million dead cap for the Broncos in order to trade him. That's not happening. So I don't know where that scenario, I got asked about that like 4 or 5 times yesterday, something about an Eric Stokes and Pat Surtain swap. Yeah, that's not happening.
Yeah, that got floated out there.
That makes no sense for anybody.
And it doesn't really. And for the Broncos, I feel as though Pat Surtain was kind of the signature draft pick for George Payton, and that would be such a weird sort of first move here as the new general manager. Hey, this is the guy we were targeting. He's our top defensive player, and I'm sorry, we have a chance to get Aaron Rodgers. Go. I hope you didn't. I hope you're renting.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all, and I don't understand that. And the people who say that he was drafted as a chess piece or a trade piece or a trade chip or whatever, that is absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah. All right. So I mean, again, where we sit right now, Aaron Rodgers is frustrated. We've seen these situations play out in the past where almost every single time the player ends up kind of giving in and going back. But people keep saying, including former Packers quarterback Brett Favre, that Aaron Rodgers is kind of built a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's a little bit why this might be different this time.
I mean, maybe. Aaron Rodgers is a guy that when he makes up his mind on something appears to have his mind set. He's not one of those guys that kind of waffles or kind of, leverages for more money or those cases. I mean, he's got plenty of money. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. You look at his family situation. I mean, the man cut off his own family after some internal strife. So I think that if Aaron Rodgers is serious about this, and he appears to, then his mind is made up.
All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about next year's quarterback class. Just in case they don't get Aaron Rodgers, they're deciding to go into the quarterback class. We're going to debunk some of the rumors and reports about that. Stick around. Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Let's take a look at next year's quarterback class just for a minute, because, Ben, we constantly hear from people that the previous year's quarterback class is always the best one, and next year's is a weak class, and this seems like a thing we do every single year, but maybe this next one doesn't have a Trevor Lawrence, like a surefire, he's the number one guy, he's been the number one guy, it won't change, but you and I both like kind of the depth of this quarterback class. And I will say something. I think the trend of seeing 4 or 5 quarterbacks going in the first round, I think that's only going to continue going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it has to. With the way that people are, the way currently that NFL franchises approach roster construction, it almost by default has to. Everybody's approaching roster constructions. You have to get a quarterback on a rookie deal in order to make it work. Well, you look at the last couple Super Bowl champions, that's not really the way you make it work, but that seems to be the prevailing school of thought. So,
and people like that fifth-year option. Teams like the fifth-year option, even though that's more of a negotiating.
Yeah, it's really, actually, you don't want to use the fifth-year option. You want to get into the extension because you get more flexibility with the money. So the fifth-year option is just a negotiating tool. If you're having contentious negotiations, you want that in your pocket, but in reality, you don't want to use it. In terms of this quarterback class, though, I mean, we would talk about Trevor Lawrence, a generational prospect since high school. You know, people have been talking about that, and he was probably a bit overhyped getting to the NFL, if we're being honest. That said, this quarterback class I didn't think was all that great. You know, I thought you had 3 guys in it, two maybes, and that was really it. Next year's class has got 10, maybe a dozen guys that could all be starter-level guys in the NFL. That doesn't necessarily mean top-tier starters. You know, it could be Andy Dalton types, but there are, you know, and the more starters that you have, the better off you are in terms of, you know, lottery tickets to try to find a guy that works for you, or the guy that works for you. So I think next year's class is actually good. I guess I'm in the minority on that, at least in terms of media people. But I'll tell you, like it's really not that bad. There's quite a few prospects in there that are intriguing. You look guys at Sam Howell at the top, Spencer Rattler, who's got the athleticism, Malik Willis, who's got that huge arm, who's got that huge arm.
Desmond Ridder out of
Cincinnati. Carson Strong, who I believe is going to be in that top conversation when all's said and done, out of Nevada. And there's just
we're not Keaton Slovis guys, but that's another one that will be.
Yeah, he's on the list. Kenny Pickett is, I think, the guy most people aren't talking about out of Pitt. He would have been drafted this year probably as QB6. I think people don't realize that, but he probably would have been QB6 in this class over Trask. Had he come out, he decided to go back to school and try to, compete in a class that was less top heavy. So, there are plenty of options in this upcoming class. And then you start getting into like the Danielses, Jaden, and so there are other players in this class that have developmental upside. And if we go back and look, Joe Burrow wasn't the number 1 overall pick when the college football season started that year. Most people viewed him as a day 3 type guy. Baker Mayfield, same thing. And so there's always a guy or two that kind of in their last season really established himself. We can go back to Matt Ryan and kind of see that at Boston College. Matt Ryan wasn't on anybody's radar until the last season at BC.
The more recent one, Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson was not contending for the top spot in the NFL draft until this last year at BYU.
Right.
It's a perfect example, perfect tie-in. We had the Trevor Lawrence. There was talk about Trey Lance because of what he did a couple of years ago, because obviously they didn't really play this last year. And then, it was kind of wide open on what the next guy would be. Mac Jones wasn't really on anybody's radar because it was Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, people would have talked about Mac Jones, but not as a first-round pick necessarily. Right. So, Justin Fields was definitely in that conversation. So there was like 2 or 3 guys that were in the conversation and ended up going 5. I think this class has the exact same possibility to do the same thing. I think Sam Howell's going to have another good year. I mean, out there at Oklahoma that they're expecting that Rattler's going to have another good year because he's working with Lincoln Riley. Mm-hmm. So I think your point is very valid, and I'm actually kind of in lockstep with you on the fact that people are underselling this next year's class, and all it takes is a couple of these guys to have really special Heisman caliber kind of years, and then we're right back in the holy cow, is this the best quarterback class we've seen in the last 5 years?
Right, and that's the difference is there's no buzz running up to this class because of a Trevor Lawrence in it that you've been talking about for 3 or 4 years. That's the difference. So,
no, I'm absolutely with you. I love that you call them the Danielses from Arizona State.
Is it the Daniel,
Georgia?
The Dan Lai? I don't know the plural there.
Yeah, you got Arizona State and then Georgia are the other 2 guys, and those guys are probably outside the top 5. But I'm with you. Carson Strong out of Nevada is a really fun prospect. Malik Willis needs to get a lot more love out of Liberty.
Yeah, he does. He's going to be in the top 3 quarterbacks in this class.
100%. And like I said, Desmond Ridder, I also think is kind of getting slept on out of Cincinnati. So there's just so many names, and not all of these guys are going to declare. Some of them have another year of eligibility. They might decide to go back. But most guys, I think, are realizing strike while the iron's hot. If they have a really good year, Sam Howell's a perfect example. He could be the number 1 overall pick out of North Carolina. And if he had a good year this last year, that offense was humming. If he takes another step forward this year, which by all accounts, when we talked to offensive coordinator Phil Longo, he said he expects him to, could be the number 1 overall pick. And then we're all of a sudden saying, well, we've seen this coming because he's so good.
Right.
And that's how these classes kind of get built. And so for all the people that are saying, well, the Broncos should have taken a quarterback in this last draft class. They should have taken Justin Fields. And by all accounts, we'll see what Justin Fields does. It doesn't mean that the next year won't offer options if the Broncos decide to go back into the draft for it.
And that's the thing. I think there's going to be a lot of deleted tweets when all's said and done about people talking about this quarterback class because it just bugs me because when people come back at me with like, well, no, it's not. And I'm like, tell me which ones you've watched, and they haven't watched any of them. So, and then there's guys in this class that might come out of nowhere might be guys that haven't put it all together that could. Guys like Bo Nix or Brock Purdy or something like that. So there are, I'm just saying, this class has a lot more options than the last one.
You're going to sub me on Bo Nix, huh?
I mean, he's Diet Tebow.
Oh my God. I was totally thinking that. That's why I wanted you to say it. I wanted to get it on tape.
I'm just hoping.
I know. All right, that's a lot of fun. We'll talk quarterbacks, obviously, throughout the offseason. For Benjamin Allbright, I'm Ryan Edwards. Thanks for watching Broncos Country Tonight.
Thanks for watching Broncos Country Tonight. Tune in to Broncos TV every weeknight at 6:30, right here on KTVD Channel 20.